The silence of the house was broken only by the rhythmic rise and fall of two tiny chests. The baby, Amelia, slumbered peacefully in her bassinet, her soft breaths like whispers against the night. Across the hall, Lily, my 5-year-old niece, lay fast asleep in my mother's room. I, cocooned in my own bed, was drifting off, the exhaustion of a long day finally catching up to me. It was midnight. Then, a blood-curdling scream tore through the stillness. I jolted upright, heart hammering in my chest. It was Lily. Her voice, shrill and panicked, cut through the darkness. "The witch is here! The witch is here!" Instinct took over. I raced out of the baby's room, heedless of the creaking floorboards under my feet. I found Lily sitting bolt upright in bed, eyes squeezed shut. She was pointing at the corner of the room, her small body trembling. "Lily, what's wrong? What do you see?" I asked, my voice strained with worry. She didn't reply, just continued to point, her whimpers turning into sobs. Her eyes remained shut, her face contorted in fear. It was as if she was caught in some terrifying dream, unable to break free. I gently guided her back into a lying position, whispering soothing words. She lay down, her body still shaking, but her screams subsided. I sat down on the edge of the bed, watching her closely. As if a switch had flipped, she seemed to fall back asleep, her breathing returning to its normal rhythm, her face relaxed. Confused, shaken, and more than a little unnerved, I crept back into Amelia's room. I just needed a moment to calm my pounding heart and try to understand what had just happened. But when I stepped into the room, my blood ran cold. Amelia, who had been fast asleep mere moments ago, was sitting up in her bassinet, her eyes wide and bright, focused on the corner of the ceiling. And she was playing patty cake. My mind reeled. A 2-month-old baby, playing patty cake? It was impossible. Babies at that age barely grasp the concept of their own hands, let alone the intricate coordination needed for such a game. She stopped clapping, her eyes still fixed on the ceiling, and let out a tiny, squeaky laugh. Then she resumed, her movements clumsy but oddly purposeful. A wave of ice-cold fear washed over me. I had seen it all, countless sleepless nights of baby care, but nothing like this. It felt wrong, unnatural, a scene ripped straight out of a horror movie. Was this some kind of sleep paralysis? Was I dreaming? Or was this something more, something infinitely more terrifying, something that defied logic and reason? I sat on the floor beside the bassinet, trying to gather my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lily's nightmare and Amelia's bizarre behavior were connected, that they were part of something bigger, something ominous. Suddenly, Amelia stopped playing patty cake and looked at me, a strange expression on her face, almost like a knowing smile. Then, she reached out her tiny hand, pointing at the ceiling. "Which," she whispered, her voice barely audible. A single word, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up, but saw nothing. Just the empty, dimly lit corner of the ceiling. My mind, though, conjured images, grotesque and macabre, of a shadowy figure, an entity of pure evil, lurking in the darkness. For the next several hours, I stayed awake, glued to my spot on the floor, watching Amelia. She remained awake, playing patty cake, occasionally looking up at the ceiling, her gaze fixed, her lips moving in a silent whisper. The fear was so palpable that I could almost taste it in the air. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of the leaves outside the window, every strange noise in the house, set my heart racing. My phone, my only link to the outside world, lay silent on my nightstand. I was cut off, alone with this terror that had invaded my home, my sanctuary. Dawn eventually crept in, painting the sky with pale hues of pink and orange. As the light flooded the room, I saw that Amelia had finally fallen asleep. She lay peacefully in her bassinet, the witch, or whatever it was, gone. But the fear, the unease, the feeling of being watched lingered, a heavy presence in the room. My parents arrived, their faces drawn with worry as I recounted the events of the night. They didn't believe me. "It's just your imagination playing tricks on you," my mother said, her voice laced with disbelief. "You're tired, stressed, and you're letting your anxieties get the better of you." I knew they were right, rationally, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Lily, meanwhile, seemed to have forgotten all about the witch, happily playing in the living room with her toys. She didn't mention the dream, not even when my mother asked if she'd had a bad dream. That day was a blur of activity, a whirlwind of trying to convince my parents that something was wrong, followed by a desperate search for any possible explanation. I scoured the internet, reading forums, watching videos, doing everything I could to find an answer. But nothing made sense. The days that followed were a living nightmare. Every time I looked at Amelia, I saw the witch, a shadowy, malevolent figure lurking in the corner of the ceiling. I saw the fear in her eyes, the tiny whisper emanating from her lips. I heard her, in the dead of night, giggling, whispering, chanting in a language I didn't understand. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. I felt trapped, caught in an invisible web spun by something sinister, something I couldn't understand, something that was slowly consuming my sanity. Fear. It gnawed at my insides, a constant, gnawing ache, a reminder of the unseen terror that lurked in the shadows. I started seeing things, or rather, I thought I saw things. Shadows moving in the periphery of my vision, whispers in the darkness, a chilling feeling of being watched even when I was alone. My parents, seeing my growing distress, decided it was time to take me to a doctor. The doctor, a kind, older woman, listened patiently to my story. She asked me about my sleep habits, my stress levels, my overall well-being. Her gentle touch and calm demeanor brought some solace to my frazzled nerves. She diagnosed me with exhaustion, stress, and anxiety, her voice a mix of concern and understanding. "It's all in your head," she said, "a product of your overworked mind. You need to relax, get some sleep, and let your body heal." But even as I accepted her diagnosis, a part of me remained unconvinced, a nagging feeling that something else was going on, something that couldn't be explained away by rational thought. I left the doctor's office feeling somewhat better, but the unease, the fear, remained. I knew I needed to take care of myself, to rest, to find some peace of mind. But then, as I held Amelia in my arms, my baby niece, innocent, vulnerable, her eyes fixed on the corner of the ceiling, she whispered, "Witch." My heart plummeted. That night I couldn't sleep. I watched Amelia, trying to find some explanation for her behavior, but every time she looked at the ceiling, every time she played patty cake, every time she whispered that ominous word, the fear returned, cold and consuming. I couldn't handle it anymore. I had to do something, had to find a way to protect Amelia, to protect myself, to break free from the grip of this unseen evil. And as I stared into Amelia's innocent eyes, a single, terrifying thought struck me: the witch, whatever it was, whatever it wanted, it was feeding on Amelia, using her as a vessel, a conduit to this world. And as I watched Amelia, her eyes bright, her movements precise, playing patty cake, a chilling realization dawned on me. It wasn't Amelia who was playing. It was the witch. I received a message from my buddy, Ryan, asking me to babysit his mom's friends' kids. He said they were a couple of sweet kids, but he needed a wingman because he was a bit intimidated by children. Intrigued, I agreed to join him. Upon arrival, we found ourselves in an ordinary suburban home. The children, a 10-year-old boy named Ethan and an 8-year-old girl named Lily, greeted us at the door. Ethan was a typical rambunctious boy, his energy radiating like summer sunshine. Lily, on the other hand, was an enigma. She possessed a haunting beauty with large, porcelain doll-like eyes that seemed to bore into us. Unlike Ethan, she uttered not a single word. Ryan explained the house rules. Ethan could play outside within the designated perimeter, but Lily was to remain indoors. The reason for this strange directive remained unexplained. Curiosity piqued, we ventured outside to supervise Ethan. The backyard was a sprawling expanse of verdant lawn and a towering oak tree. Ethan made a beeline for the tree, a twinkle in his eye and a mischievous grin on his face. We followed at a distance, allowing him his freedom. But suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the tranquility. We rushed towards the source of the commotion, our hearts pounding in our chests. There was Ethan, standing over a writhing snake that he had nailed to a wooden board. A gruesome spectacle that sent a chill down my spine. Horrified, we wrenched the board from his grasp and freed the creature. As it slithered away into the undergrowth, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply amiss. With the disturbing incident behind us, we retreated inside to check on Lily. She was seated on the couch, her wide eyes fixed on the television screen, an eerie stillness surrounding her. We tried engaging her in conversation, but she remained mute, her gaze unwavering. As the evening wore on, the weight of the unsettling events pressed upon us. The cheerful camaraderie had evaporated, replaced by an inexplicable dread. We couldn't shake the feeling that there was something profoundly wrong with this seemingly ordinary household. We took turns watching the children. Ethan behaved erratically, his once jovial demeanor replaced by a sullen silence. Lily continued her unnerving vigil on the couch, her eyes seemingly absorbing every minute detail of our movements. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as we waited for Ryan's mom to return. The tension in the air was palpable, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the television and the ticking of the clock. Finally, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway signaled our release. Ryan's mom returned home, and we hastily recounted the day's extraordinary occurrences. To our astonishment, she seemed unfazed. She merely shrugged off the snake incident as boyhood curiosity and brushed aside our concerns about Lily's silence, saying she was just a shy child. Despite her nonchalance, we couldn't erase the images of that day from our minds. Ethan's cruelty towards the snake and Lily's haunting stillness had left an indelible mark on us. We couldn't help but wonder what else was hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary family. From that day forward, I never saw Ryan or the children again. But the memory of that unsettling experience lingered, a chilling reminder that even the most ordinary of facades can conceal hidden depths of darkness and secrets best left undisturbed. I had been babysitting the Johnson children for a few months at that point. Emily, the 4-year-old girl, and her older brother Jake, who was 7, were both energetic and curious, which made for an interesting time. I had grown to enjoy spending time with them, even if they could be a handful at times. One evening, I was getting Emily ready for bed while Jake was in his room playing with his toys. I helped Emily into her pajamas and we were just about to head to the bathroom to brush her teeth when she suddenly darted out of her room, completely naked. "Emily, what are you doing? Go put your clothes back on," I called out after her, but it was too late. Jake had already seen his sister running around in her birthday suit, and his reaction was immediate. "Yo, gross. Put your clothes on, Emily." "I don't like naked girls," he yelled, covering his eyes with his hands. Emily, undeterred, chimed in with a comment that left me feeling completely unsettled. "Daddy likes naked girls," she said matter-of-factly. I tried to shake off the unease that was creeping over me. After all, it was entirely possible that Emily had just picked up that phrase from overhearing something her parents had said. But still, the way she had said it, with such a casual confidence, made me feel uncomfortable. I quickly got Emily dressed and tucked her into bed, then went to check on Jake. He was still sitting on his bed, looking a little shell-shocked. "Are you okay, Jake?" I asked him. He nodded, but didn't say anything. I could tell that he was still processing what had happened. I decided to take a few minutes to talk to him about it, to make sure he understood that it was normal for siblings to see each other naked sometimes, but that it was important to respect each other's privacy and not make a big deal out of it. Jake seemed to understand, and soon after our conversation he was back to his usual self, playing with his toys and chattering away. I finished up my duties as a babysitter and headed home, still unable to shake off the unease I had felt earlier. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I couldn't understand why Emily had said something like that, and it was bothering me more than I cared to admit. I decided to reach out to Mrs. Johnson and tell her what had happened, hoping that she might be able to shed some light on the situation. Mrs. Johnson was shocked when I told her what Emily had said, and she immediately assured me that her husband would never say or do anything to make their children feel uncomfortable. She thanked me for bringing it to her attention and said she would talk to Emily about it. I felt relieved, knowing that Mrs. Johnson was taking the situation seriously and that she would get to the bottom of it. I went about my day, trying to put the incident out of my mind. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was not quite right. I started to notice little things, like the way Jake would sometimes stare at Emily in a way that made me uncomfortable, or the way Emily would sometimes make odd comments that didn't make any sense. I began to wonder if there was something more going on, something that I wasn't seeing. I decided to do some research, hoping to find some answers. I spent hours scouring the internet for information on child abuse and its warning signs. I read articles and forum posts, searching for any clue that might help me understand what was going on with the Johnson children. And that's when I found it, a post on a forum for survivors of child abuse. The poster described a situation that was eerily similar to what I had witnessed with the Johnson children. They talked about how the abuser would manipulate the children, making them think that what was happening was normal. They talked about how the children would sometimes make innocent comments that, when taken in context, were actually hints at the abuse they were suffering. I felt my heart drop as I read the post. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but deep down I knew that it was true. I knew that something was not right with the Johnson children, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I called Mrs. Johnson and told her what I had found, and she was devastated. She immediately contacted the authorities, who began an investigation into the matter. The investigation revealed that Mr. Johnson had been sexually abusing both Emily and Jake for years. He had manipulated them, making them think that what he was doing was normal, and had threatened to hurt them if they told anyone. The parents were horrified, and they immediately sought help for their children. Mr. Johnson was arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse, and the children were placed in therapy. I was heartbroken to learn about the abuse the children had suffered, but I was also relieved that it had been uncovered. I knew that it would be a long and difficult road to recovery for Emily and Jake, but I was hopeful that with the right help, they would be able to heal and move on from the trauma. As for me, I knew that I would never forget the events that had transpired. I would always remember the day that Emily ran out of her room naked, and the unease that it had caused me. I would always remember the day that I had finally understood what was really going on, and the pain that it had caused. But I also knew that I had done the right thing. I had spoken up, and I had helped to put a stop to the abuse that Emily and Jake had suffered. I had given them a chance at a better life, and that was all that mattered. From then on, I made a promise to myself. I would always trust my instincts, and I would never ignore the warning signs. I would always speak up, even if it was difficult. I would always do what was right, no matter what. I had no words. I could only watch, paralyzed by fear, as the man's hand continued to turn the knob, twisting and pushing, determined to gain entry. Time, it seemed, had stopped. A minute. 2. Maybe 5. Then, another thud, but this time, the man wasn't at the door. He had disappeared. The man was gone. Just like that. The silence, heavy and pregnant with fear, felt deafening. We stood there for what seemed like an eternity, our bodies frozen in the aftermath of the encounter, our minds spiraling into chaos and fear. As the silence stretched on, the shadow of my fear began to recede, replaced by a tingling sense of unease. Something was wrong. Something wasn't adding up. We stood there for what felt like an age, listening for any sound, for a sign of his return. Nothing. "He's gone, Timmy," I said, my voice still a shaky whisper. But his eyes remained glued to the door, his face etched with a mixture of fear and shock. The silence hung heavy in the air. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I didn't know. I had no answer. My gaze drifted to the window. The man was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere in the neighborhood, watching us. Finally, we decided to call our parents. With trembling fingers, I dialed my mom's number. It rang twice before she answered, her voice laced with concern. "Why are you calling, honey?" she asked. We're sorry, but we need you to come home now." My voice was a shaky whisper. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with urgency. "There's a man. He was at the front door. He was trying to get in." I couldn't force myself to speak any further, the words catching in my throat. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then I heard her reply, her voice sharp and laced with worry. "I'll be home as soon as I can." I hung up the phone, my limbs still trembling, my mind a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. I glanced at Timmy. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Don't worry," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Mom will be here soon." But even as I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling of foreboding that hung heavy in the air. My gaze drifted to the front door, the glass still cold and frosted, reflecting the dim light of the afternoon sun. It was a moment of unbearable tension, a chilling premonition that something was terribly wrong. "Don't worry," I repeated, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Everything will be all right. Mom is coming home now." That night, we snuggled into the couch, watching television. My mom sat beside us, her hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. "It's going to be okay, honey," she whispered, her voice calming and sweet. But even as she spoke, I couldn't help but glance at the front door, my mind replaying the events of the day, the image of the man in the trench coat an unwelcome guest in the theater of my mind. "Did they find him?" I whispered, barely audible. My mom looked at me, her face etched with concern. "No, honey," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We'll be extra careful from now on." In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the lingering fear that had become a constant companion. The image of the man in the trench coat haunted my every thought, his shadowy figure lurking in the corners of my vision. My mind raced with scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. What would have happened if he had managed to turn the doorknob? What was his intention? The questions remained unanswered. My parents, shaken but determined to remain calm, had reported the incident to the police. But no one was caught, no one was ever identified. It was as if the man, like a ghost in the night, had simply vanished. Weeks turned into months, and the shadow of the incident receded, but never disappeared entirely. I grew older, my youthful innocence slowly giving way to a sobering awareness of the dangers that lurked in the world. The image of the man in the trench coat, a stark reminder of the unexpected terror that could rear its head in the most mundane of circumstances, remained etched in my memory. Even decades later, I still catch myself glancing at the front door, a faint tremor running down my spine. The echo of the doorbell still reverberates through the house, a phantom sound conjuring memories of fear and uncertainty. It was a lesson learned in the crucible of childhood, a harsh reality that even behind the secure walls of home, darkness can seep in, threatening to consume everything. The man in the trench coat, a specter from my past, remains a constant reminder that the unknown can be both terrifying and liberating. The world can be both a haven and a battleground, a place where innocence and vulnerability can coexist dangerously with the lurking possibilities of harm. It's a reminder that even behind locked doors and secure walls, life can sometimes take an unexpected and unsettling turn.